The bullet pierced the tin can so cleanly that it spun 3 full rotations before clattering to the dirt, and every man in the posse fell silent as they watched Harriet Lawson lower her Winchester rifle with the same casual grace a woman might set down a teacup. The year was 1878, and in all of Portland, Oregon, nobody had ever seen shooting like that, least of all from a woman barely 23 years old with honey-colored hair twisted into a practical braid and eyes the color of storm clouds gathering over the Cascade Mountains. "I believe that settles it," Sheriff Morton said, pushing his hat back on his graying head and scratching at his temple like he could not quite believe what he had just witnessed. 5 shots, 5 cans, and you hit every one dead center while the rest of these boys were still trying to find their aim. The 10 men standing in a loose semicircle around the makeshift shooting range looked at their boots, their hands, anywhere but at Harriet. She had beaten them all, and they knew it. Some of them had been lawmen for years, tracking outlaws through the dense forests and mountain passes of the Oregon Territory. Others were experienced hunters who could drop an elk at 200 yards. But none of them could match what this woman had just done. Harriet felt the weight of their stares and their silence, heavy as winter rain. She had not asked to be here. She had not wanted to prove herself against these men. But when the Dalton brothers had robbed the Portland bank 3 days ago and shot her father in the process, leaving him with a shattered shoulder that might never heal right, she had marched into the sheriff's office and demanded to join the posse. "A woman cannot ride with lawmen," Sheriff Morton had said, not unkindly. He had known her father for 20 years, had bounced Harriet on his knee when she was small. "It is too dangerous, and the men would not accept it." "Then let me prove I can shoot better than any man you have," she had replied, her voice steady despite the fury burning in her chest. "If I cannot outshoot them, I will go home and say nothing more about it, but if I can, you let me ride with the posse." The sheriff had agreed, probably thinking it impossible. Now he stood with his hands on his hips, studying her with new eyes, while the men shifted uncomfortably around them. The morning sun climbed higher over the pine trees that ringed the town, casting long shadows across the dusty ground where they had set up the targets. "Well," Harriet said, meeting the sheriff's gaze without flinching, "do I ride with you or not?" Before Sheriff Morton could answer, one of the men stepped forward. Harriet had noticed him during the shooting competition, had felt his eyes on her even when she was concentrating on her targets. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of rangy build that came from long days in the saddle. His hair was dark as coal dust, and his eyes were an unusual shade of green that reminded her of moss growing on river stones. He looked to be around 25, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days of stubble, and a way of moving that spoke of confidence earned rather than assumed. "Name is Wade Harlow," he said, stopping a few feet from her. His voice was deep and smooth, with a slight drawl that suggested he had not always lived in Oregon. "I've been tracking outlaws for 3 years, and I have never seen shooting like that, not from anyone." Harriet raised her chin slightly, waiting for the but that usually followed such statements. Instead, Wade did something that surprised her. He held out his hand for her to shake, treating her like he would any other skilled shooter, any other potential member of the posse. She took his hand. His grip was firm and warm, calloused from years of handling rope and reins and weapons. Something flickered in his green eyes, something she could not quite name, and for a moment they stood there, hands clasped, while the other men watched in uncomfortable silence. "Miss Lawson," Wade said, still holding her hand, "if we are going after the Dalton brothers, I would be honored to ride beside you. A shot like that could mean the difference between bringing them in alive or in pine boxes." I prefer alive, Harriet said, pulling her hand back even though some part of her wanted to let it linger. I want them to stand trial for what they did to my father and the others they have hurt. Agreed, Wade said, and she saw something like respect in his expression. Too many men are quick to shoot first. It takes more courage to bring someone in breathing. Sheriff Morton cleared his throat and the spell was broken. All right then. Miss Lawson rides with us. We leave in an hour. The Daltons are headed east toward the mountains, and we need to catch them before they cross into the high country where tracking gets near impossible. Get your horses ready and pack light. This could take days, maybe more. The men dispersed, some still grumbling about riding with a woman, but Harriet did not care. She had proven herself with her rifle, and that was all that mattered. She turned to head back toward town where her horse was stabled, but Wade fell into step beside her. "You learned to shoot like that from your father?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "He taught me when I was 12, Harriet said, remembering those long afternoons in the meadow behind their house, the patient way her father had shown her how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it, how to become one with the weapon until it was merely an extension of her will. He said a woman living in the West needed to know how to defend herself, and he was right. I have scared off more than one wolf and one drunk cowhand with that rifle." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "Your father is a wise man. I am sorry about what happened to him." "He will recover," Harriet said, though she was not entirely sure. The doctor had removed the bullet, but infection was always a risk, and her father was not a young man anymore. "He has to." They walked in silence for a few moments, their boots crunching on the hard, packed dirt of the road that led back into Portland. The town was small but growing, with a main street lined with wooden buildings that housed a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a blacksmith, and various other establishments necessary for frontier life. Beyond the town, the Willamette River flowed dark and steady, and beyond that rose the green mountains that made Oregon Territory so beautiful and so treacherous at the same time. "Where did you come from originally?" Harriet asked, glancing sideways at Wade. She was not usually one for small talk, but something about this man made her curious. "Texas," Wade said, confirming what she had suspected from his accent. "Near San Antonio. Came west 5 years ago looking for something different. Found work as a ranch hand, then started doing some tracking for local lawmen. Turns out I have a knack for it. I can read signs that other men miss." "Why did you leave Texas?" Wade was quiet for a moment, and Harriet wondered if she had overstepped. But then he answered, his voice careful. "My family owned a small ranch. Drought hit hard and we lost most of the cattle. My father died trying to save what little we had left. My mother remarried a year later to a man who did not need another mouth to feed, so I left and headed west. There was nothing for me there anymore." Harriet heard the pain beneath the matter-of-fact words and felt a pang of sympathy. "I am sorry. That must have been hard." "It was a long time ago," Wade said, but she could tell it still hurt. Some wounds never fully healed, she supposed. "What about you? Born and raised in Portland?" "My whole life," Harriet confirmed. "My mother died when I was young. Fever took her one winter. It has been just me and my father ever since. He worked as a clerk at the bank, keeping the books. He never hurt anyone, never caused trouble. And the Daltons shot him just because he was there, just because he looked up at the wrong moment when they came through the door with their guns drawn." Her voice had grown tight with anger, and she forced herself to take a breath. Getting emotional would not help anything. She needed to stay focused, stay sharp. The posse would be watching her, waiting for her to falter, to prove that a woman did not belong on a manhunt. She could not give them that satisfaction. "We will catch them," Wade said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her believe him. I promise you that." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the determination in his green eyes. This was not just a job to him, she realized. He took it personally when outlaws hurt innocent people. Maybe that was why he had become a tracker in the first place. They reached the livery stable where Harriet had left her horse, a sturdy gray mare named Juniper. The mare nickered when she saw Harriet, pushing her nose against her shoulder in greeting. Harriet stroked the soft muzzle, feeling some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "Good horse," Wade observed, running an expert eye over Juniper's conformation. "Not too big, good for mountain trails. You have ridden her long, 4 years. She was a gift from my father on my 19th birthday." Harriet began checking the mare's tack, making sure everything was secure and in good repair. "She is as sure-footed as they come and does not spook easy." "That will serve you well where we are going," Wade said. "The trails east of here get rough, and a horse that panics can get you killed." An hour later, the posse assembled at the edge of town. There were 12 of them in all, counting Harriet. Sheriff Morton had stayed behind to keep order in Portland, leaving his deputy, a lean man named Curtis, in charge of the manhunt. Curtis was competent enough, but clearly unhappy about Harriet's presence. He kept shooting her dark looks as they prepared to ride out. Wade noticed and moved his horse closer to Harriet's. "Pay Curtis no mind," he said quietly. "He is one of those men who thinks women should stay home and bake pies, but he will come around once he sees you can handle yourself." "And if he does not?" Harriet asked, adjusting her hat against the morning sun. "Then he is a fool," Wade said simply, and despite herself, Harriet smiled. They rode out in a loose formation, following the trail the Dalton brothers had left behind. It was not hard to track them at first. 3 men riding hard left plenty of signs, broken branches, hoof prints, the remains of a hastily abandoned campfire. Wade rode at the front with Curtis, reading the trail, while Harriet stayed in the middle of the group. She could feel the other men watching her, waiting to see if she would slow them down or complain about the pace. She did neither, keeping Juniper moving steadily and never asking for a break. They rode through forests of Douglas fir and cedar, their horses' hooves muffled by the thick carpet of fallen needles. The air smelled of pine and earth and the distant promise of rain. Oregon in early autumn was beautiful, the leaves just beginning to turn gold and crimson in patches, the sky a deep blue interrupted by white clouds drifting lazily overhead. But Harriet barely noticed the beauty. Her mind was focused on the 3 men they were chasing, on bringing them to justice, on making sure her father's suffering meant something. The Dalton brothers were known outlaws, wanted in 3 territories for robbery and murder. They were dangerous, ruthless, and they would not surrender easily. Harriet knew that. But she also knew she was a better shot than any man in this posse, and if it came to a confrontation, she would not hesitate. They stopped to rest the horses around midday, dismounting in a small clearing beside a creek. The water ran clear and cold, fresh from the mountain snowmelt, and Harriet knelt beside it to refill her canteen. Wade knelt beside her, doing the same. "You are doing well," he said, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. "The men are noticing." "Are they also noticing that we are gaining on the Daltons?" Harriet asked, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "We are about half a day behind them now," Wade confirmed. "They are riding hard, but they are not taking care of their horses. They will have to stop soon to let them rest, and that is when we will close the gap." "How long have you been tracking?" Harriet asked, genuinely interested. She had done some hunting with her father, but tracking men was different from tracking game. "Since I was a boy," Wade said. "My father taught me. He said a good tracker is part detective, part hunter, and part fortune teller. You have to read what has already happened, understand what is happening now and predict what will happen next. You have to think like your quarry. And what are the Daltons thinking right now? Wade was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. They are scared. They made a mistake shooting your father. They were supposed to get in and out clean, but something went wrong. Your father must have startled them and they panicked. Now they know there will be a posse after them, and they are running hard for the mountains. They probably have a hideout somewhere up high, a place they think they can defend or disappear from. So we need to catch them before they reach it. Exactly. Wade met her eyes, and again she felt that strange flutter in her chest. And we will. I have been tracking these three for months. I know how they think. They are not as smart as they believe they are. Curtis called out that it was time to move, and they mounted up again. The afternoon wore on, the sun tracking across the sky as they climbed higher into the foothills. The trees grew more dense, the trail more difficult. But Wade never lost the track, and Harriet found herself admiring his skill. He moved with absolute certainty, reading signs in the bend of a branch or the scatter of pebbles that she would have missed entirely. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Curtis called a halt. "We camp here for the night," he announced. "Cold camp, no fire. I do not want to risk the Daltons seeing smoke and knowing we are close." The men dismounted and began setting up a sparse camp. Harriet unsaddled Juniper and rubbed the mare down, making sure she had water and some grain. Around her, the men did the same with their horses, and she noticed with satisfaction that none of them were paying her any special attention anymore. She was just another member of the posse now, doing her job. Wade appeared at her elbow with a piece of dried beef and some hardtack. "Not much of a supper, but it will keep you going." "Thank you," Harriet said, accepting the food. They sat together on a fallen log, eating in companionable silence while the darkness gathered around them. The forest came alive with night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the underbrush, the distant call of a coyote. "You ever think about doing something else?" Wade asked suddenly. "Other than being a bank clerk's daughter, I mean. You have a rare skill with that rifle. You could teach shooting, or even become a lawman yourself if the world were different." Harriet considered the question. "I have never thought much about it. My life has always been taking care of my father and our home. But you are right. The world is not set up for women like me. I can outshoot any man here, but nobody would hire me as a deputy or respect me as a shooting instructor. They would say it is not proper, that women should not handle guns unless absolutely necessary." "The world is changing," Wade said. "Slowly, maybe, but it is changing. Women are voting in some territories now, running businesses, doing things people said were impossible 20 years ago." "Not fast enough," Harriet said, but she appreciated his optimism. "My father always said I could do anything I set my mind to, but the reality is different. I love him for believing in me, though." "He raised a remarkable woman," Wade said, and there was something in his voice that made her turn to look at him. His green eyes caught the last light of the day, and she saw warmth there, admiration, and something else she was afraid to name. "You barely know me," she said, suddenly shy. "I know you rode with a posse of men who did not want you here. I know you outshot every one of them without bragging about it. I know you are out here seeking justice for your father instead of sitting home crying. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Harriet felt heat rise in her cheeks and was grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "You are not what I expected when I joined this posse. What did you expect? Men who would mock me, or treat me like a burden, or try to send me home. But you have been kind. Why?" Wade was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was the strongest person I ever knew. She ran our ranch after my father died, worked from dawn to dusk keeping everything together. But the men around us would not help her, would not take her seriously. They thought a woman could not run a ranch on her own. She proved them wrong every day, but it was hard and lonely. I watched her struggle, and I swore that if I ever had the chance to treat a woman with the respect she deserved, I would take it. So when I saw you shoot today, saw what you could do, I was not about to be another man who tried to hold you back. Harriet felt something shift in her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the mild autumn night. Your mother would be proud of you. I hope so, Wade said softly. She died the year before I left Texas. Same man she remarried ended up working her to death. I have always regretted not being there, not being able to protect her. Without thinking, Harriet reached out and laid her hand on his arm. You cannot blame yourself for that. You were young and you could not have known. Wade looked down at her hand, then up at her face. In the darkness, she could barely see his expression, but she felt the intensity of his gaze. You are kind, Harriet Lawson, as kind as you are skilled. The use of her first name sent a shiver through her, intimate and unexpected. They were sitting so close now that she could feel the heat of his body, could smell leather and horses and something else, something distinctly him. Her heart was beating faster and she knew she should move away, should maintain proper distance. But she did not want to. We should get some sleep, Wade said finally, though he sounded reluctant. Tomorrow will be a long day. Yes, Harriet agreed, pulling her hand back even though every part of her wanted to leave it where it was. Tomorrow. She spread her bedroll near the other men, keeping her rifle close beside her. The ground was hard and the night cool, but she had slept in worse conditions during hunting trips with her father. What kept her awake was not discomfort, but the memory of sitting beside Wade, the feel of his arm under her hand, the way his voice had softened when he spoke about his mother. She had never felt this way about any man before, this strange combination of respect and attraction, and something deeper she could not quite name. Across the camp, she could see Wade's silhouette where he had taken first watch. He sat with his back against a tree, his rifle across his knees, scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. She watched him for a while, then finally closed her eyes and tried to sleep. She must have succeeded because the next thing she knew, Curtis was shaking her shoulder, the sky just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Up, he said gruffly. We ride in 20 minutes. The posse moved quickly, saddling horses and packing gear with the efficiency of experienced outdoorsmen. Harriet rolled up her bedroll, checked Juniper's shoes and tack, and was ready before some of the men. Wade caught her eye across the camp and nodded approvingly, and she felt absurdly pleased by his silent praise. They rode through the early morning mist, the forest quiet except for birdsong and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Wade reported that the Daltons were only a few hours ahead now, and Curtis pushed the pace harder. Harriet could feel the tension mounting in the group. Soon, they would catch up to the outlaws, and then everything would come to a head. The trail led them higher into the mountains, the air growing cooler and thinner. They passed through a narrow canyon where the rock walls rose steep on either side, and Harriet felt a moment of unease. This would be a perfect place for an ambush. But they emerged safely on the other side, and Wade pointed ahead to where fresh tracks showed in the soft earth. They stopped here recently, he said, dismounting to examine the ground more closely. See how deep the hoofprints are. The horses were standing still, and there are boot prints here. The men dismounted, probably to scout ahead or discuss their next move. Curtis gathered the posse around him. We are close now. From here on, we move quietly. No talking unless necessary. Keep your weapons ready, but do not fire unless I give the order or you are fired upon. Our goal is to take them alive if possible. Understood, the men nodded, and Harriet checked her rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. This was what she had come for. This was her chance to make the Dalton brothers pay for what they had done. They rode on, slower now, Wade still in the lead reading the trail. The trees thinned out as they climbed higher, replaced by rocky outcroppings and scattered pines. Ahead, Harriet could see the peak of a mountain rising against the bright blue sky, its summit still touched with snow despite the season. Wade held up a hand, and the posse stopped. He dismounted and moved forward on foot, studying something Harriet could not see. Then he turned and gestured for Curtis to join him. The two men spoke in low voices, and Curtis's face grew grim. He waved for the rest of the posse to dismount and move forward quietly. "They are just ahead," Curtis whispered. Wade found their camp, 3 horses, 3 men. "They are in a clearing about 200 yards from here. Seems like they finally stopped to rest. We are going to surround them quietly. If we can get into position without being spotted, we can take them without a shot being fired." The posse split up, moving through the trees with as much stealth as a dozen men and horses could manage. Curtis assigned Harriet to approach from the south side of the clearing, and Wade fell in beside her without being asked. Together they moved through the pines, leading their horses carefully to avoid snapping branches or dislodging stones. As they drew closer, Harriet began to hear voices. The Daltons were arguing about something, their words carrying on the still mountain air. She could not make out what they were saying, but they sounded angry and tired. Good. Tired men made mistakes. She and Wade tied their horses to a sturdy pine and continued on foot. Through the trees ahead, she could see the clearing Curtis had mentioned. It was small, ringed by tall pines and rocks, with a cold fire pit in the center. 3 men sat around the fire pit, and even from this distance, Harriet recognized them from the wanted posters she had seen in the sheriff's office. The Dalton brothers, Frank, Jesse, and Cole. Frank was the oldest and the leader, a big man with a black beard and mean eyes. Jesse was lean and nervous, constantly moving. Cole was the youngest, barely into his 20s, with a baby face that belied his violent nature. Harriet felt a cold fury settle over her as she looked at them. These were the men who had shot her father, who had left him bleeding on the floor of the bank while they grabbed bags of money and fled. She wanted to march into that clearing right now and demand they answer for what they had done. But she forced herself to stay still, to wait for the signal. Wade touched her arm lightly, bringing her attention back to the present. He pointed to the right, where she could just make out another member of the posse moving into position. Then he pointed left, and she saw another. They were surrounding the clearing, closing the trap. It was only a matter of time now. But then everything went wrong. One of the Dalton horses, a skittish bay, suddenly threw up its head and whinnied loudly. Frank Dalton was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. "Someone is here," he snarled, his voice carrying clearly to where Harriet and Wade crouched behind the trees. "We have been followed." The other brothers scrambled to their feet, drawing their weapons. Curtis, realizing the element of surprise was lost, stepped out from his hiding place with his rifle raised. "This is Deputy Curtis of Portland. You are under arrest for bank robbery and attempted murder. Throw down your weapons and surrender." For a moment Harriet thought they might actually comply. Jesse looked scared, his eyes darting around the clearing like a trapped animal, but Frank just laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You think we are going to hang for shooting some clerk? Not likely, Deputy. You want us, you will have to take us." And then he fired. The shot went wide, splintering bark from the tree beside Curtis's head. Curtis dove for cover, and suddenly the clearing erupted in gunfire. The Daltons were shooting at anything that moved, and the posse was shooting back. Harriet saw one of the posse members go down, clutching his leg where a bullet had grazed him. Another dove behind a boulder, firing back at the outlaws. "Stay down," Wade said urgently, pushing Harriet behind a thick pine trunk. But she shook him off, bringing her rifle to her shoulder. "I did not come here to hide," she said, and stepped out into the open. It was a calculated risk. The clearing was chaos, men shouting and shooting, horses screaming and pulling at their tethers. But Harriet blocked it all out, falling into the calm focus her father had taught her. She found Frank Dalton in her sights, his big body an easy target as he fired wildly at the posse. She could kill him right now, end this with one shot. But she had told Wade she wanted them alive, and she meant it. She adjusted her aim and fired. The bullet struck Frank's gun hand, and his pistol went flying. He howled in pain and rage, clutching his bleeding hand. Before he could recover, Harriet had worked the lever action of her Winchester and was sighting on Jesse. He was running for the horses, trying to escape. She led him just slightly and fired again. The bullet hit the ground right in front of his feet, and he stumbled and fell, landing hard on his face. Cole was the last one, still armed and dangerous. He had taken cover behind a saddle and was firing methodically at the posse. Harriet saw him sight on Curtis, saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She did not hesitate. Her third shot hit Cole's rifle, knocking it from his hands with such force that he cried out and fell backward. And then, suddenly, it was over. The gunfire ceased, the echoes fading into the mountain silence. The Daltons were disarmed, Frank clutching his bleeding hand, Jesse face down in the dirt, Cole staring at his bruised hands in shock. The posse members emerged from their hiding places, weapons trained on the outlaws, but there was no fight left in the brothers. Curtis strode into the clearing, his face flushed with adrenaline and triumph. "Get them tied up," he ordered, and several men moved forward with rope. Frank was still cursing and threatening, but with his gun hand useless, he could do nothing but submit as his wrists were bound. Wade walked to the center of the clearing, looking around at the scene. Then his eyes found Harriet, still standing where she had fired her shots, her rifle now lowered but ready. He walked over to her slowly, and everyone watched. "Did you see what she did?" One of the posse members said, his voice filled with awe. 3 shots, 3 targets. She disarmed all of them without killing anyone. "Best shooting I have ever seen," another agreed. Wade stopped in front of Harriet, and she met his green eyes. They were blazing with something fierce and bright, something that made her breath catch. "You saved Curtis's life," Wade said. "Cole was about to shoot him in the back. You stopped him." "I told you I wanted them alive," Harriet said, trying to keep her voice steady even though her heart was racing from the aftermath of the fight. "I meant it." Wade lowered his rifle then, setting it carefully on the ground. The gesture was deliberate, symbolic. Around them, the posse had gone quiet, watching this exchange with open curiosity. "Harriet Lawson," Wade said, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air, "you outshot every man in this posse. You showed more courage, more skill, and more mercy than any of us could have managed. And I have been a fool." "What do you mean?" Harriet asked, confused. "I have been trying to tell myself that what I was feeling was just respect, just admiration for your abilities. But the truth is, I started falling for you the moment I saw you shoot yesterday, and every moment since has just made it worse. When you stepped out into that clearing just now, when I saw you in danger, I realized something." He took a breath, and Harriet saw his hands tremble slightly. "I realized I cannot imagine going back to my life without you in it. I know this is sudden. I know we have only known each other 2 days, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Harriet's mind was reeling. This could not be happening. Men did not propose to women they had just met, not in the real world. But then again, maybe in the West, where life was hard and uncertain and tomorrow was never guaranteed, maybe people learned to recognize important things when they saw them. "Wade," she said softly, "what are you saying?" He dropped to one knee right there in the clearing, in front of the tied-up Dalton brothers and the grinning Posse members and God and the mountain sky. "I am saying marry me instead. Instead of going back to your quiet life, instead of caring for your father while your own dreams get smaller. Marry me, and we will build something together. I do not have much, just a small ranch I have been building up, but it is yours if you want it. And I promise I will never try to change you or tame you or make you into something you are not. I will love you exactly as you are, with your rifle and your courage and your merciful heart." Tears pricked at Harriet's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She did not cry. She never cried. But this man kneeling in the dirt had just offered her everything she did not know she wanted. A partner who saw her strength as something to celebrate rather than fear. A future that did not involve growing old alone. A love that had blazed up fast and hot like summer lightning, but felt more real than anything she had ever known. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then louder, stronger. "Yes, Wade Harlow, I will marry you." Wade surged to his feet and pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, her rifle clattering to the ground as she wrapped her arms around his neck. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste kisses she had read about in books. It was fierce and desperate and full of promise, and she kissed him back with everything she had. Around them, the posse erupted in cheers and whistles. Even Curtis was grinning, shaking his head in disbelief. Frank Dalton, his hand wrapped in a bandage, spat on the ground. "Damned fools, both of you. Love will just get you killed out here." Wade broke the kiss long enough to look at the outlaw. "Maybe, or maybe it is the only thing worth living for." He turned back to Harriet, cupping her face in his hands. "I mean it, every word. I love you, Harriet. I know it is fast, but out here, sometimes you do not have time to wait. Sometimes you have to grab onto the good things when you find them before they slip away." "I know," Harriet said, and she realized she did. She had watched too many people wait for the right moment, the perfect time, only to have life take those chances away. Her mother had died young, her father had nearly been killed, and tomorrow was never guaranteed. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you when you shook my hand yesterday, when you treated me like an equal." "You are more than my equal," Wade said seriously. "You are the best shot I have ever seen and the bravest woman I have ever met. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Harriet said, and kissed him again. Curtis finally cleared his throat loudly. "As much as I hate to interrupt this touching moment, we still have 3 prisoners to transport back to Portland. Can the 2 of you save the romance for after we get these outlaws behind bars?" Wade and Harriet broke apart, both of them laughing. "Right," Wade said. "Sorry, Curtis. Let us get moving." The journey back down the mountain was slow going with the prisoners in tow, but Harriet did not mind. She rode beside Wade, and every time their eyes met, she felt that same surge of warmth and certainty. The other men treated her differently now, with a respect that bordered on reverence. She had proven herself in the most decisive way possible, and they would never question her abilities again. They stopped that night in a different clearing, this time with a fire since they did not need to hide anymore. The Daltons were tied securely to a tree, guards posted to watch them. Harriet sat beside Wade, their shoulders touching, watching the flames dance and flicker. "What is your ranch like?" she asked, curious about the place that would become her home. "It is small," Wade admitted. "Just a few hundred acres in the foothills east of Portland. I have been building a house, stone by stone, in my spare time. It is not finished yet, but it has good bones. There is a stream running through the property, good grass for horses and cattle. I have been running a small herd, nothing fancy, but it makes enough to live on. I always thought it was just for me, a place to be alone. But now I can see it differently. I can see it as a home, our home. It sounds perfect, Harriet said, and meant it. She had never wanted a grand mansion or a life of luxury. She wanted land and freedom and a partner who understood her. Wade was offering all of that. My father will want to meet you properly, of course. Once we return to Portland and he has recovered enough. I will be honored to meet him, Wade said. I need to ask his permission to marry you, do it right. He will like you, Harriet said confidently. He always said I should find a man who respected my mind as much as my appearance. Someone who would not try to cage me. I could never cage you, Wade said, turning to look at her in the firelight. It would be like trying to cage the wind. You are meant to be free, Harriet. All I want is to be free beside you. They talked long into the night, sharing stories about their pasts, their dreams for the future. Wade told her about his plans for the ranch, how he wanted to breed horses, how he thought they could build something substantial if they worked together. Harriet told him about her father, about growing up in Portland, about the secret dream she had never shared with anyone of maybe opening a shooting school for women someday. You should do it, Wade said immediately. Imagine how many women would benefit from learning to shoot the way you do. It would give them confidence, the ability to protect themselves. We could build a range on the property, offer lessons. You would not mind? Harriet asked, surprised. Most men would find the idea of their wife running a business unseemly. Mind, I think it is brilliant. You have a gift, Harriet. It should not be hidden away. It should be shared. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a contentment she had never experienced before. This was what it was supposed to feel like, she thought. This ease, this rightness, this sense of being fully understood and accepted. She had been so lucky to join that posse, so lucky that Wade had been there to see her shoot. Fate worked in strange ways sometimes. They reached Portland 3 days later, dusty and tired but triumphant. The town turned out to greet them, cheering as Curtis led the Dalton brothers down the main street toward the jail. Sheriff Morton was there, and when he saw Harriet riding beside Wade, both of them grinning, he just shook his head and smiled. I hear you proposed in the middle of a shootout, the sheriff said to Wade after the prisoners had been locked up. That is a new one, even for the West. Actually, it was right after, Wade corrected, and she said yes. Of course she did, the sheriff said, clapping Wade on the shoulder. Any woman who can shoot like that deserves a man smart enough to appreciate her. Congratulations to you both. Harriet barely heard the conversation. She had already dismounted and was running toward her father's house, her heart in her throat. The doctor had said he was recovering, but she needed to see for herself, needed to tell him the Daltons had been caught, needed to share her news. She burst through the door and found her father sitting up in bed, his shoulder bandaged but his color much better than when she had left. Harriet! He exclaimed, his face lighting up. Thank God you are home safe. I have been worried sick. We caught them, Harriet said, rushing to his bedside and taking his good hand. We caught all 3 Dalton brothers, and they will stand trial for what they did to you. I never doubted it, her father said, squeezing her hand. Not with you on the trail, but I can tell there is something else. Your eyes are shining, daughter. What happened out there? So Harriet told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. The shooting competition, the trail through the mountains, the final confrontation, and Wade's unexpected proposal. Her father listened quietly, his expression unreadable. And for a moment Harriet feared he would disapprove of her accepting a proposal from a man she barely knew. But then he smiled, and it was the warmest smile she had seen from him in years. "This Wade Harlow, he saw you for who you truly are and loved you for it." "Yes," Harriet said. "He did not try to change me or protect me unnecessarily. He respected my skills and my choices." "Then he has my blessing," her father said. "When can I meet him? How about right now?" Wade's voice came from the doorway, and Harriet turned to see him standing there, hat in hand, looking respectful and slightly nervous. "Sir, I am Wade Harlow, and I would like to formally ask for your daughter's hand in marriage." Harriet's father studied Wade for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking in everything about the younger man. Then he nodded slowly. "Come in, son. Sit down. Let us talk." Harriet excused herself to give them privacy, though she was dying to know what they were saying. She paced in the kitchen, making tea she did not want, until finally the door to her father's room opened and Wade emerged. He was smiling. "He said yes," Wade told her, pulling her into his arms. "Though he did warn me that if I ever made you unhappy, he knows exactly where to shoot to make it hurt the most without killing me." Harriet laughed, relief and joy flooding through her. "That sounds like him." "He also said the wedding should happen soon," Wade continued. "He wants to walk you down the aisle while he is still recovering, said it will give him something to focus on besides the pain." "How soon?" Harriet asked, her heart beginning to race again. "Next week, if you are agreeable." "I know it is fast, but given your father's condition and the fact that we both already know what we want, why wait?" "Why wait indeed," Harriet agreed, and stood on her toes to kiss him. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. The women of Portland, who had initially been skeptical of Harriet's place in the posse, rallied around her when they heard she was getting married. They helped her sew a dress, simple but beautiful, in cream-colored calico with lace at the collar and cuffs. They brought food for the wedding celebration, helped decorate the small church where the ceremony would take place. Wade spent the week preparing his ranch for Harriet's arrival, finishing touches on the house he had been building. He brought her out to see it 3 days before the wedding, and Harriet fell in love with the place immediately. The house was built of stone and timber, solid and strong, with 2 bedrooms and a large main room with a fireplace. The property stretched out in rolling meadows dotted with pines, the mountains rising in the distance. The stream Wade had mentioned burbled over rocks at the edge of the property, clear and cold and perfect. "We can build the shooting range over there," Wade said, pointing to a flat area near the stream. "Good sightlines, natural backstop from that hill. We will need to clear some trees, but it is doable." "It is perfect," Harriet breathed, imagining what the place would look like in different seasons, imagining their life here together. "I love it, Wade. I love all of it." "I am glad," he said, pulling her close, "because I want you to be happy here. This is your home now as much as mine. Anything you want to change, any improvements you want to make, just say the word." The wedding day arrived bright and clear, autumn sun streaming through the church windows as Harriet walked down the aisle on her father's good arm. He was pale and moving slowly, but he was there, his eyes shining with pride as he led her toward where Wade waited at the altar. Wade looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his dark hair slicked back, his green eyes fixed on Harriet with such love and devotion that she nearly stumbled. But she made it to his side, and her father placed her hand in Wade's with a whispered blessing. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when Wade slipped a gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her for all their days, Harriet felt the truth of it down to her bones. This was right. This was meant to be. However fast it had happened, however unconventional the circumstances, this marriage was the most right thing she had ever done. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said, beaming at them. "Wade, you may kiss your bride." And he did, thoroughly and enthusiastically, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing, giddy with happiness and the beginning of their new life together. The celebration afterward was loud and joyful, the whole town turning out to congratulate the couple who had captured the Dalton brothers and fallen in love in the process. Sheriff Morton made a toast about how sometimes the best partnerships were forged in the heat of danger. Curtis, who had been so skeptical of Harriet at first, admitted he had never seen better shooting and wished them both well. Even some of the other posse members, who had grumbled about riding with a woman, came forward to shake their hands and wish them happiness. As the sun began to set, Wade and Harriet slipped away from the celebration, riding together toward their ranch. They had agreed to spend their first night as husband and wife in their own home, in the house Wade had built with his own hands. The stars were coming out as they arrived, bright points of light in the darkening sky. Wade helped Harriet down from her horse, and she stood for a moment just looking around, breathing in the pine-scented air, listening to the stream and the evening bird song. This was her home now. This beautiful, wild place. "Are you happy?" Wade asked, coming to stand beside her. "More than I ever thought possible," Harriet said honestly. "A week ago I was just the daughter of a bank clerk, living a quiet life that seemed like it would never change. Now I am married to an incredible man, living on a ranch in the mountains, with dreams and plans for the future I never dared imagine. We are going to have an amazing life together," Wade said, pulling her into his arms. "I promise you that." He carried her over the threshold of their home, and Harriet laughed at the traditional gesture. Inside, the house was cozy and welcoming, a fire burning in the hearth that Wade must have arranged for someone to light earlier. There was even a vase of wildflowers on the table, their colors bright in the firelight. "Wade Harlow, you are a romantic," Harriet teased, but she was touched by the gesture. "Only for you," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "Only ever for you." That night, they consummated their marriage, and Harriet discovered that the passion that had sparked between them from the very first was only the beginning. Wade was a tender and attentive lover, making sure she found pleasure before seeking his own, treating her with a combination of reverence and desire that left her breathless. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, talking and laughing and planning their future. "I want children," Wade said, running his fingers through her loose hair. "If you do, I mean. I do not want to presume." "I want them too," Harriet said, imagining small children running around the ranch, teaching them to ride and shoot and love this wild land. "Maybe 2 or 3 if we are blessed. They will be as fierce as their mother," Wade predicted, "and as stubborn as their father. We will have our hands full." "Good," Harriet said, kissing his chest. "I have never wanted an easy life, just a meaningful one." "We will have that," Wade promised. "I swear it." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Harriet's life. She and Wade fell into an easy partnership, working together to run the ranch and care for the growing herd of cattle and horses. Harriet proved to be as skilled at ranch work as she was at shooting, unafraid of hard labor or long hours in the saddle. Wade treated her as a full partner in all decisions, asking her opinion on which cattle to buy, which pastures to use, how to manage the finances. They began building the shooting range in the spring, and by summer, Harriet was teaching her first students. Word had spread about the woman who had outshot an entire posse and brought in the Dalton brothers, and women from all over the territory began seeking her out for lessons. Some wanted to learn to protect themselves, others wanted to hunt, a few just wanted to experience the thrill of hitting a target. Harriet taught them all with patience and skill, and watching her students gain confidence was deeply satisfying. Wade supported her endeavor completely, helping her build targets and maintain the range, even taking over some of the ranch work so she could dedicate more time to teaching. He never complained, never suggested she should focus on being a wife instead of running a business. He had meant what he said on that mountain, about loving her exactly as she was. Harriet's father recovered slowly but steadily, and he visited the ranch often. He and Wade became close, bonding over their shared love for Harriet and their appreciation for honest work and straight dealing. It warmed Harriet's heart to see the two most important men in her life getting along so well. The Dalton brothers stood trial that autumn and were convicted on multiple counts of robbery and attempted murder. They were sentenced to 20 years in prison, and while Harriet knew some people thought they deserved hanging, she was satisfied with the outcome. Justice had been served without more death, and that felt right to her. A year after their wedding, Harriet discovered she was pregnant. She told Wade one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. For a moment, he just stared at her, and she worried he was not ready. But then he let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "You and me, a baby. Are you happy?" Harriet asked, though his reaction made it clear he was. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Wade said, setting her down carefully and placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents. This is everything I did not know I wanted until I met you." Their daughter was born the following spring, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and made the whole house shake. The midwife from town arrived just in time, and Wade paced in the main room while Harriet labored in their bedroom. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst into the room despite the midwife's protests, and Harriet saw tears streaming down his face. "A girl," the midwife announced, handing the cleaned and wrapped baby to Harriet. "Healthy lungs on her and a head full of dark hair." Harriet looked down at her daughter's face, so tiny and perfect, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known possible. This small creature was part her and part Wade, a product of their love and their partnership. She had her father's green eyes already starting to show and her mother's determination, if her strong grip on Harriet's finger was any indication. "What should we name her?" Wade asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and touching the baby's soft cheek with one finger. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had never decided definitively. Now, looking at her daughter, Harriet knew exactly what felt right. "Grace," she said. "Grace Ann Harlow. For the grace that brought us together and the grace we have been given in this life." "Grace," Wade repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect. She is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed Harriet gently, mindful of her exhaustion. "Thank you for this gift, for her, for everything." 2 years later, they had a son, whom they named William after Wade's father. He was a sturdy baby with Harriet's gray eyes and a calm temperament that contrasted nicely with Grace's fiery spirit. Watching Wade with their children, patient and loving and present, Harriet fell in love with him all over again. He was everything she could have wanted in a husband and father. The shooting school continued to grow, and Harriet trained dozens of women over the years. Some of her students went on to compete in shooting exhibitions. Others used their skills to hunt and provide for their families, and a few even became lawwomen in towns that were progressive enough to hire them. Harriet was proud of every one of them, proud to have played a part in giving women the tools to protect and provide for themselves. Wade expanded the ranch steadily, building it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. But he never let work consume him entirely. He made time for his family, for long rides with Harriet exploring the mountains they both loved, for teaching their children to ride and rope and appreciate the land that sustained them. When Grace was 5 and William was 3, Harriet's father passed away peacefully in his sleep. It was not unexpected. He had been declining for some time, but it still hit Harriet hard. Wade held her while she cried, let her grieve, and helped her plan a beautiful funeral that honored the man who had raised her to be strong and capable and unafraid. He was so proud of you, Wade told her as they stood by the grave after the service. He told me once that you had exceeded every hope he ever had for you, that you had found a life of purpose and love, and that was all any parent could want for their child. I wish he could have seen Grace and William grow up, Harriet said, wiping her eyes. He saw enough, Wade said gently. He saw them happy and loved and safe. That was enough. Time passed, as it always does, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. Grace grew into a skilled horsewoman and an even better shot than her mother, something Harriet found both alarming and deeply satisfying. William proved to have his father's gift for tracking and his mother's steady hand, and by the time he was 15, he was helping Wade manage the ranch with real competence. When Grace was 17, a young rancher named Samuel from a neighboring property began courting her. Harriet and Wade watched carefully, remembering their own whirlwind romance, wanting to make sure this young man was worthy of their fierce, independent daughter. Samuel proved patient and respectful, treating Grace as an equal and never trying to diminish her skills or her spirit. When he asked permission to marry her, both Harriet and Wade gave their blessing. I want what you and Papa have, Grace told her mother the night before her wedding. I want a partnership, someone who sees me and loves me for exactly who I am. That is what you deserve, Harriet said, helping her daughter into the wedding dress they had made together. And I believe Samuel can give you that. But remember, Grace, you have the skills and the strength to make your own way if you ever need to. Never forget that. I would not, Grace said, hugging her mother tight. You taught me too well. William married at 22 to a school teacher named Elizabeth who had come west from Boston. She was educated and thoughtful with a quiet strength that complemented William's more outgoing nature. They built a house on the far edge of Wade and Harriet's property, starting their own herd with cattle gifted from the main ranch. As the years rolled on, Harriet and Wade found themselves with grandchildren, 6 in all, who filled their home with noise and laughter and chaos. Wade proved to be an indulgent grandfather, always ready with stories about the old days when their grandmother had outshot an entire posse, and he had fallen in love with her in the middle of a manhunt. Is it true? The grandchildren would ask Harriet. Did you really shoot the guns out of the outlaws' hands? It is true, Harriet would confirm, though the details grew hazier with time. And your grandfather really did propose to me right there on the mountain in front of everyone. That is so romantic, one of the granddaughters would sigh, and Harriet would smile, remembering on their 25th wedding anniversary, Wade took Harriet back to the mountain where he had proposed. They were older now, grayer, with lines on their faces and aches in their joints that had not been there in their youth. But as they stood in that clearing, remembering the day that had changed everything, Harriet felt young again. Would you do it all over? Wade asked, taking her hand. If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, would you still say yes? In a heartbeat, Harriet said without hesitation. Every single time I would say yes to you. Good, Wade said and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a new ring, more elaborate than the simple gold band he had given her at their wedding. It was set with a small diamond that caught the sunlight and sparkled. Because I wanted to ask you again. Harriet Lawson Harlow, will you continue to be my wife, my partner, my love for whatever time we have left? Yes, Harriet said, laughing and crying at the same time. Always yes, He slipped the new ring onto her finger above the old one, and they kissed there in that clearing, surrounded by the mountains and the memories and the life they had built together. They had 15 more good years after that, years filled with the joys and sorrows that come with long life. They watched their children prosper and their grandchildren grow. They saw Oregon become a state, saw the wild frontier they had known slowly tamed and civilized. They adapted to the changes while holding fast to what mattered most: family, land, and the love they had found in the most unlikely of circumstances. Wade died first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, with Harriet holding his hand. She grieved him fiercely, but without regret. They had been given 40 wonderful years together, more than many people ever got, and she was grateful for every single day. She lived for 5 more years after that, still teaching the occasional shooting lesson, still riding Juniper's granddaughter through the property she and Wade had built together. When she finally passed, it was quietly, in the home Wade had built, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. They buried her beside Wade on a hill overlooking their ranch, with the mountains rising in the distance and the stream singing its eternal song nearby. On the headstone, their children inscribed both of their names and the dates of their long lives. But they added something else too, words that captured the essence of the love story that had begun with an outlaw chase and a shooting competition and an unexpected proposal. She outshot every man. He loved her for it. Together they built a life of purpose, partnership, and enduring love. And in the end, that was the truest summary of their story. Not just that Harriet could shoot better than anyone, or that Wade had been brave enough to recognize and cherish that skill, but that they had found each other at exactly the right moment, had chosen each other quickly and completely, and had built something lasting and beautiful from that first improbable meeting. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell the story for generations, embellishing some details and forgetting others, but always remembering the core truth: that sometimes love strikes fast as lightning, and when it does, the only thing to do is say yes and hold on tight for the incredible ride that follows. The ranch continued to operate, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own touches while honoring the foundation Wade and Harriet had laid. The shooting range Harriet had built was preserved and expanded, eventually becoming a renowned training facility for women from all over the West who wanted to learn not just shooting but confidence and self-reliance. Grace became something of a legend in her own right, competing in shooting exhibitions throughout the West and winning more times than anyone could count. She taught her own daughters to shoot, passing down the skills her mother had given her. And she always told them the story of how their grandmother had ridden with a posse of men, had outshot them all, and had won the heart of the best man in Oregon in the process. William managed the ranch for decades, expanding it even further while always maintaining the ethical, thoughtful approach his parents had modeled. He treated his workers fairly, cared for the land respectfully, and built a reputation for honesty that made the Harlow name synonymous with integrity throughout the territory. The story of Harriet and Wade became part of the folklore of Portland and the surrounding area. When people talked about the old days, about the wild frontier and the outlaws and the brave men and women who had tamed the West, they always mentioned the woman who outshot a posse and the cowboy who had been smart enough to propose to her on the spot. Some versions of the story claimed Harriet had shot the hats off all 3 Dalton brothers. Others said Wade had gone down on one knee in the middle of the gunfight itself, bullets flying around them. The truth, as is often the case, was less dramatic but more meaningful. It was not about the impossible trick shots or the death-defying romance. It was about two people recognizing something extraordinary when they found it and having the courage to grab hold of it with both hands. In the quiet moments when the ranch was peaceful and the wind whispered through the pines, some claimed you could still feel their presence. Wade checking the fences one more time, making sure everything was secure. Harriet at the shooting range, patiently teaching another generation of women that they were capable of far more than the world told them they could do. Their love story had started with gunfire and ended with grace, and everything in between had been exactly what they had promised each other that day on the mountain. A partnership of equals, a love that recognized and celebrated strength, a life built on mutual respect and shared dreams. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Cascade Mountains, a young couple walking the trails of what was still called the Harlow Ranch would pause and feel like they were not quite alone, like something warm and benevolent was watching over them with approval, well, that was just the legacy of two people who had loved each other fiercely and well. Their story lived on, not just in the words passed down through generations, but in the very land they had cherished, the values they had upheld, and the belief that when you find something worth holding on to, you hold on with everything you have. The Wild West had been full of stories of violence and hardship, of outlaws and lawmen, of fortunes won and lost. But at its heart, it had also been a place of possibility, where people could reinvent themselves, where the old rules did not always apply, where a woman could outshoot every man in a posse and a cowboy could be wise enough to see that as the gift it was. Harriet Lawson and Wade Harlow had lived that possibility. They had taken a single moment of recognition and turned it into a lifetime of love. They had built something lasting from the raw materials of courage, skill, and mutual respect. And in doing so, they had proven that sometimes the best love stories are not the ones that follow all the rules, but the ones that have the courage to write their own. Their names were carved into the wood of the ranch house, worn but still legible after all the years. Their spirits were woven into the fabric of the land, inseparable from the mountains and streams and wide open skies they had loved. And their legacy lived on in every woman who learned she was capable of more than she imagined, in every partnership built on equality rather than dominance, in every quick moment of recognition that led to a lifetime of devotion. The West had been wild once, untamed and dangerous and full of promise. People like Harriet and Wade had been part of what transformed it, not by conquering it or taming it completely, but by learning to live with it, to work with it, to build lives of meaning against its beautiful, harsh backdrop. They had faced down outlaws and hardship, and all the challenges that frontier life could throw at them, and they had done it together, as partners, as equals, as two halves of a whole that made both of them stronger. In the end, that was the real legacy they left behind. Not just the successful ranch or the shooting school or the children and grandchildren who bore their names, but the proof that love could strike like lightning and still burn steady for a lifetime. That a man could see a woman's strength and love her more for it, not less. That a woman could be fully herself, capable and fierce and uncompromising, and still find a partner who celebrated rather than feared those qualities. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, the same colors it had been that evening when Wade first proposed, when Harriet first said yes, when their future together was just beginning to unfold. The ranch was peaceful now, the work of the day done, the animals settled, the land resting under the gathering stars. Somewhere in the main house, a great-great-grandchild was probably hearing the story again, wide-eyed and enthralled by the tale of the grandmother who could outshoot anyone and the grandfather who had loved her for it. And if that story inspired one more person to recognize love when they saw it, to have the courage to reach for it, to build a life of partnership and purpose, then Harriet and Wade's legacy would continue exactly as they would have wanted. Not in monuments or museums, but in living, breathing people choosing courage and love and partnership over fear and conformity and the easy path. The wind stirred the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth and possibility. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, witnesses to all the human dramas played out in their shadow. And on a hill overlooking the ranch, two headstones stood side by side, bearing witness to a love that had started with a shooting competition and a wild proposal, and had become something eternal. She had outshot every man in the posse. He had lowered his rifle and asked her to marry him instead. And together, they had built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love and partnership that would echo through the generations, reminding everyone who heard their story that the best things in life are often the ones we grab hold of quickly, trust completely, and hold on to forever.